He didn't have knowledge of it when it occurred, and so it would be in his best interest, and I'm sure his lawyers have advised him of this, to not necessarily have all the details. I think the way forward here for Donald Trump Jr. and for Mr. Kushner is to do what they said they want to do, which is to testify publicly. And I think stop answering questions about these things on a daily basis, because as the historian said, the details are changing. Just go to Congress, go to the Senate Intelligence Committee, go under oath, tell your story in full, in public, and under oath, and answer all the questions. That would be a much better strategy at this point, I think, than engaging in this on a day-to-day basis.
If this were the Bush White House, would Jared Kushner still be working there?
Well, this is a position without analog. I mean, Jared Kushner is a relative of the president. We didn't really have an analogous situation like that in the Bush White House. Ultimately, White House advisors serve at the pleasure of the president, and that's really all that it is, the pleasure of the president. When the president wants you there, you're there. When the president doesn't, you're not there. So right now, Jared Kushner has a big portfolio that President Trump has given him to work on. He's been tasked with some of the biggest agenda items, and I see that President Trump has confidence in him, and as long as that's the case, he'll still be in the White House.
Jill, Putin has denied over and over again interfering in the election. Is the discovery of this meeting, where we all see it black and white in the emails, what was promised to Donald Trump Jr. for this meeting, is that likely to worry the Kremlin?
You know, there's very little at this point, Anna, coverage of the specifics of that meeting. I mean, it's out there in the Russian media, but basically, in fact, I was just looking this afternoon, they now are using the word nothing burger. It translates as burger ni s чем, a burger with nothing. So it's already, you know, there's kind of this counter narrative, which is it's not a big deal. This is all just kind of a hoax. And there's really, you know, there's another word that was used back in the Soviet days, whataboutism. So I think the way the Russians, state-controlled media are covering it is saying, yes, maybe there was a little bit of collusion, interference, but what about when the United States interfered in Russian elections? And they go back to even the Soviet days, but certainly to like 1994 and Boris Yeltsin. So there's a lot of kind of shifting the explanation and saying it's no big deal, you do it too. It's become very murky, but I can definitely tell you there's not a lot of coverage of this issue.
I can't believe they're using the term nothing burger there, because that sounds exactly like what we're hearing coming from the president's supporters here. They're calling it, using that nothing burger term as well. The White House has said that despite this meeting, that if it happened, okay, but there's still no there. I want to play for you, however, what Republican Congressman Leonard Lance of New Jersey said when he was asked about possible collusion.
Can you definitively say, can you look into my eyes, camera, your constituent, and say, I am 100% sure the president and his campaign did not engage in a criminal conspiracy with a foreign intelligence apparatus?
No, I cannot, and that's why I want to get to the bottom of it.
So, Julian, we are starting to see a shift among some Republicans who are not necessarily defending the president and his team. Is this the story that changes everything?
This could be really important. I mean, a big part of the story so far is you have a Republican Congress that has not been particularly eager to go after a Republican president. But once this story broke, we've heard a few members of Congress, including Congressman Lance, be more vocal, at least in raising the questions, if not making accusations. You've seen more conservative media figures in several outlets, including Fox News, openly also criticize the president. So there are some cracks. We don't know how far this will go. Ultimately, this is as much a political investigation as a legal one, because Congress has to handle the matter. But these kinds of statements, this kind of unrest among conservatives, can certainly hurt the administration.
How would you expect the White House is responding to all of this, Scott? Because today, silence.
Well, you have to remember there's a couple of different response channels here. As it relates to Donald Trump Jr., I was concerned this week when I read that some White House staffers may have been involved in crafting his response. That's unfortunate for them, because they may have not been in that meeting and had no knowledge of it, but now they're probably in the investigatory loop of the special counsel, and so they may have to answer questions. If I were the president, I would order internally at the White House, no White House staff can work on any responses for anyone other than the office of the president. and I would ask my Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, to strictly enforce that. You want to protect your staff. You don't want to put them in harm's way when you have investigations going on. And so I hope they are looking into that moving forward, because I think that would give a lot of relief and relieve some anxiety that might be on the minds of some staffers.
Let me ask you a follow-up question here. Earlier this week, President Trump told reporters who are aboard Air Force One that he would invite Putin to the White House. Not right now, though. It's not the right time. Your thoughts?
I am not somebody who believes that the Russians are our friends. I do believe the intelligence agencies when they say that the Russians tried to meddle in the election. I don't necessarily believe that the Trump campaign had anything to do with it, but that's what the purpose of these investigations is for. I also think the president right now could ask the Congress to send him the Russia sanctions bill post-haste. And that would send a strong bipartisan message that, hey, I get it, the Russians are messing around here, we don't like it, and we're going to take some action. So I actually think there's some definitive actions the president could take that would give the country confidence that he sees the Russians for what they are. I don't think inviting Vladimir Putin to the White House is on that list for me at the moment.
Jill, real quick, we heard from some of the Russian government officials late this week that they are preparing some kind of a response if those compounds, those Russian compounds that were taken away following the election and the meddling as a result of how the Obama administration handled that situation, if that isn't returned to them soon, they're going to retaliate in some way. What would that look like?
Oh, yeah. Well, remember, at the end of Obama, he kicked out 35 Russian diplomats who were believed to be intelligence agents, sent them back to Russia, and took over 2 compounds that the Russians owned in Maryland and New York. And the Russians have been very angry about that for months now. They have said that if this is not resolved, and I think initially they thought, under Trump it probably would be resolved, they'd get them back, but there's no sign at this point that that is going to happen. So they're really playing hardball, and they're saying, if we don't get those back, we are going to be kicking out, the number they said is about 30 American diplomats from Moscow, and retaliation of some type. There is a dacha, a country house that the American embassy owns outside or controls outside of Moscow, and that's probably what they would go after. They wouldn't go, we believe, after the residence of the American ambassador, but it would be a very strong sign that they've given up any hope that this is going to happen. And I have to say, Anna, there's a lot of, kind of realism creeping in now that their hopes that the relationship would improve under Donald Trump are coming to nothing at this point. It's worse than ever.
Jill Doherty, Julian Zelizer, and Scott Jennings, our thanks to all of you.
Thank you.
Coming up, live in the CNN newsroom, watching some conservative news outlets might lead you to believe the meeting between Donald Trump Jr. and a Russian lawyer is a Democratic plot to entrap the Trump campaign, but it wasn't. And one Fox News host called it for what it is, how conservative media is handling the Russia investigation now. Plus, word tonight that fired FBI Director James Comey is writing a book. Our senior response over those bombshell emails from the president's eldest son are giving some criticism, or now getting criticism from journalists affiliated with conservative media outlets. Fox News anchor Shepard Smith unleashing this just over 24 hours ago. Watch.
Why is it lie after lie after lie? If you clean, come on clean, My grandmother used to say, when first we practice to, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. The deception, Chris, is mind-boggling. And there are still people out there who believe we're making it up. And one day they're going to realize we're not, and look around and go, where are we? And why are we getting told all these lies?
Let's talk it over with our senior media correspondent, host of Reliable Sources, Brian Stelter. As we know, President Trump often praises Fox News. He's often watching, especially Fox and Friends.
Right.
What do you think it means for the White House when you have people on Fox News like Shep Smith, or commentators, conservative minds like Charles Krauthammer, criticizing the president and his family over how they've handled this latest Don Jr. meeting?
And in Krauthammer's case, saying this is collusion. But I think Shep Smith is the exception to the rule. Shep Smith, Charles Krauthammer, Chris Wallace at Fox, there are a number of news anchors and commentators in the conservative media universe who have expressed real concern about the misleading statements and the falsehoods that have come out of the White House. But for the most part, most of the Trump-friendly hosts on cable television have stayed firmly behind the president and his family, so firmly that it can be comical at times, saying that this could all be a plot set up by the Democrats. Some Democrats have then lost the election, so how effective would that have been? So we've seen a lot of different conspiratorial theories presented by conservative media hosts, explanations for Don Jr.'s shifting statements, a lot of blame being cast in various directions. But that moment from Shep Smith was notable because he was breaking with that conservative media narrative and trying to call it out for viewers and asking what a lot of journalists are trying to ask, other journalists and other networks, why are there so many misleading statements?
Are you seeing a difference in how these different right-wing blogs or conservative media outlets are handling this meeting with Don Jr., especially because his emails are so black and white?
There's definitely been a number of theories that cast blame on others and cast Don Jr. as the victim, sometimes explicitly. I was emailing with a radio news director in Iowa who said, look, the folks here, conservatives here in Iowa, they are ticked off, they're angry, but they're angry at the media. They believe that you all are trying to oust this duly elected president. I noticed that Breitbart, one of the big kind of conservative news sites out there, picked up his comments to me and wrote a whole story about them. So anything that supports that narrative that this is about the media, this is a fake news narrative, that's certainly popular. We're seeing that all over conservative news sites. And I think that's important to recognize because it shows up in the polling. It shows up in the polling. We're going to see another poll tomorrow from ABC and the Washington Post. I suspect it'll show the same thing we've seen up until now, dramatic, even extreme partisan divides in how this Russia issue is viewed. Whether it is a real issue or whether, as the president says, a hoax, depends so much on what media you're consuming.
And his narrative, calling it a hoax, calling it a witch hunt, what you're telling me is still resonating even after this latest shoe that dropped.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears now because we're learning fired FBI Director James Comey just got a book deal.
Yes, he is out there selling a book. This is according to the New York Times and just confirmed by CNN. He's going out actually pitching the book, and he's probably going to have the deal in the next few days. This is going to get interest from all the big publishing houses. You think about James Comey and the story he may be able to tell. According to the Times, this is not just going to be a tell-all. This is going to be a bigger book about his entire life's work, his career, and the big moments he has faced decisions in his career. But all it takes is a few pages or a few chapters about what happened with President Trump to get publishing houses very interested. So it's sort of a no-brainer move by him, but up until now we hadn't heard anything about a book deal. He'll be out shopping this now.
All right, Brian Stelter, thanks.
Thanks.
And don't forget, Brian's in the headline. I want to talk it over with Dean, along with CNN political commentator and former Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, Andre Bauer. So Dean, this is a narrative that has really dogged President Trump since early in his campaign, and frankly, even before that, back to when he said President Obama wasn't born here in the United States. I'm wondering, what do you want to see? Is there something specifically that you want to see out of this administration to help calm that angst that clearly is personal to you and others?
Right. I mean, what I wrote about for the Daily Beast was actually protests by self-professed Trump supporters who had also been labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center as involved in hate groups, white supremacist groups, neo-Confederate groups. I don't think they have a problem